My husband left me over an Instagram joke, and everyone thinks I'm the monster. Okay, seriously, how thin can a man's skin possibly be? I'm genuinely asking. Because my husband, Gideon, packed a single, ridiculously neat suitcase and walked out on me 2 days ago. The reason? A joke. A stupid 10-second video I posted on my Instagram story for my friends. Now my phone is dry, my house is silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, and I'm supposed to feel like I'm some kind of monster. I just don't get it. He's the one who overreacted, who escalated a harmless bit of fun into a life-altering drama. Don't get me wrong, Gideon is a good man. If you need your taxes done meticulously, or if you want someone to assemble IKEA furniture with the quiet, focused rage of a bomb disposal expert, he's your guy. He is the human equivalent of a beige sedan, reliable, safe, and utterly, soul-crushingly predictable. His idea of a wild Friday night is creating a new color-coded spreadsheet to track our monthly spending. He's stable, he's kind, but he's boring. The thing is, my life isn't boring anymore. My friends, especially my best friend Kareen, are sharp. They're witty, they're online, they speak in a language of memes and sarcastic cultural commentary that Gideon just doesn't understand. When I'm with them, I feel like I'm sparkling, I feel seen. But when I bring Gideon into that world, it's like watching a black and white movie character wander into a 4,000 color film. He just doesn't fit. He stands there, smiling politely while they're riffing, and then kills the vibe by asking about their retirement plans. He's an anchor, and I feel him pulling me down, making me look just as dull and out of touch as he is. So yeah, I made a joke about it, because what else was I supposed to do? When Gideon and I first met, his predictability was a balm. I was in my early 20s, fresh out of a chaotic relationship with a musician who thought paying rent was an optional lifestyle choice. Gideon was solid, he had a 5-year plan, he remembered to take the trash out without being asked. His quiet steadiness felt like a harbor, a safe place to land. His boring was my peace. For years, that was more than enough. But peace, I've learned, can start to feel a lot like a cage when you're looking out at a more exciting world. That world opened up for me about a year ago when I landed a marketing job at a trendy new tech startup. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people like Kareen. People who didn't just live their lives, they curated them. Every lunch, every happy hour was an opportunity for content. They were hilarious and intimidatingly cool, and I wanted in. I started dressing differently, talking differently, trying to keep up with the relentless torrent of TikTok trends and Twitter discourse. I was good at it. I was finally becoming one of the cool kids. The problem was Gideon couldn't or wouldn't keep up. I'd drag him to work parties or drinks with my new friends, and the disconnect was physically painful to watch. I remember one night, we were at a rooftop bar and everyone was laughing about some viral video of a guy falling off a treadmill. Gideon just stood there with a pained smile, nursing his single beer. When there was a lull in the conversation, he turned to Kareen's boyfriend, a podcast host, and earnestly asked, "So, what's your strategy for long-term capital gains in a volatile market?" The silence was deafening. Kareen shot me a look over her glass, a mix of pity and amusement that made my stomach clench with shame. It was the look that said, "Oh, you poor thing, saddled with this relic." I felt my cheeks burn. In that moment, he wasn't my husband, he was my social liability. It happened over and over. They'd reference a meme and he'd ask for a detailed explanation, killing the joke instantly. They'd talk about a controversial influencer and he'd say, "I'm not familiar with their work." He wasn't being rude, he was just being Gideon. But in that world, his earnestness was a punchline. I tried to talk to him about it once gently. "Maybe you could just, I don't know, watch some of the stuff I send you?" He just looked confused. "Why? It doesn't interest me, Lyndon. Why should I pretend it does?" He had this whole thing about public dignity, something drilled into him by his very traditional parents. He once told me with complete seriousness that the most important promise two people can make is to never make the other person the butt of a joke in front of others. "You're a team," he'd said, "you have to protect each other's honor." I'd rolled my eyes at the time. It sounded so dramatic, so old-fashioned. Honor, who even talks like that anymore? It was just another one of his rigid, outdated principles. A rule from a rulebook no one else was playing by. The perfect opportunity, the moment that would seal my place as one of the girls, came last Saturday afternoon. It was one of those quiet gray days where the hours stretch out endlessly. I was scrolling through my phone on the couch, half watching some reality show when I looked up and saw him. There he was at the dining room table, completely absorbed. He had his reading glasses, the cheap ones from the pharmacy, perched on the end of his nose, and his brow was furrowed in concentration as he stared at his laptop. On the screen was the enemy of all joy, a sprawling, complex Excel spreadsheet. He was meticulously plugging numbers into our household budget. My mind, now hardwired for Kareen's brand of humor, saw it instantly, a perfect little vignette of domestic despair. It was just too perfect. The earnest posture, the glasses, the silent clicking of the keyboard as he calculated our projected grocery spending for the next quarter. It was a caricature of the very thing I'd been complaining about. Quietly, I pulled out my phone. I didn't even stand up. I just zoomed in from across the room, making sure to capture the full tragicomic scene. I filmed for about 10 seconds, just the sight of his back and the glowing screen. Then came the artistry. I went into the Instagram editor, found a ridiculously sad, over-the-top classical violin piece, and laid it over the video. For the caption, I typed out the first thing that came to my head, channeling the voice of my friends. SOS, I'm married to an accountant from 1950 and my soul is being slowly devoured by a spreadsheet. Send wine or a divorce lawyer, husband life the glamour save him. My finger hovered over the share button for only a second. This was it. This was the kind of content Kareen would post. It was edgy, it was relatable, it was funny. I tagged her and two other girls from work and posted it to my story. The reaction was immediate and exactly what I'd craved. Within minutes, the DMs started rolling in. Laughing, crying emojis from everyone. Kareen replied, OMG Lyndon, you are a savage. I am deceased. Another friend wrote, this is the bravest thing I've ever seen. It was a rush, a hit of pure, unadulterated social validation. I felt clever, daring, and most importantly, seen by the people whose opinions I had started to value more than anyone else's. It never even occurred to me that Gideon would see it. In my mind, his world and my world were two separate planets. He didn't follow my friends, and I didn't think he even knew how to look at Instagram stories. It was just a joke, after all. A harmless little performance for an audience of maybe a dozen people. He didn't find out on his own, of course. Gideon barely knows how to use Instagram. The blow came from family, which in his world is 1,000 times worse. The next evening, I came home from a celebratory happy hour with my team, still buzzing from a successful campaign launch, to find the apartment eerily quiet. The TV was off, no sound of him cooking in the kitchen, no scent of garlic and olive oil. I found him sitting on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the blank wall opposite him. He was so still he looked like a statue. Hey, I said, dropping my purse on the console table with a clatter that felt unnervingly loud in the silence. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. He didn't turn to look at me. His voice, when it came, was flat and devoid of any emotion, like a line read from a script. My nephew sent me something today, a video. My blood went cold, a sudden icy plunge in my gut, but my voice when I found it was all forced lightness. Oh, that, Gideon, come on. It was just a silly joke for my friends. It meant absolutely nothing. You can't seriously be upset about that. He finally turned his head, and the look in his eyes stopped my heart. It wasn't the anger I had expected, or even the hurt I was prepared to manage with apologies and reassurances. It was nothing, a vacant, hollowed-out disappointment. It was the look you give a stranger who has just proven to be exactly as untrustworthy as you feared. A joke, he repeated, not as a question, but as a statement. A final diagnosis. I spent all of Saturday planning our budget so we could afford that trip to Italy you wanted for our anniversary. The one you've been talking about for 3 years. I was looking for ways to cut back so I could surprise you with first-class tickets. He paused, his gaze unwavering and heavy. I wasn't just doing the budget, Lyndon. I was building something for us, a memory, and you were filming me. You took that private moment of dedication to you and you sold it for a few laughs from people whose last names you barely know. That's not fair, I shot back, my voice rising with a hot wave of defensiveness. It wasn't like that, it was just content. It's what people do, it's not a big deal, you're being so sensitive about this. He just gave a small, sad shake of his head, as if my response was the last piece of data he needed for a conclusion he'd already reached. I finally understand, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an impossible weight. I told you what mattered most to me, that we protect each other. That we never make the other person a punchline for the world. And you didn't just fail to protect me, you were the one holding the camera. And with that, he stood up. He walked into our bedroom. I followed him, my words spilling out in a frantic, jumbled mess of excuses and accusations. Where are you going? You're blowing this completely out of proportion. You can't be serious, it's a joke, why are you doing this? He didn't answer. He just opened the closet, pulled out his suitcase, and began methodically placing folded shirts inside. He moved with a calm, deliberate precision that terrified me. While I was still talking, a rising tide of panic chatter, he pulled out his phone. I watched, my throat tightening, as he opened my contact. I saw my own smiling face on his screen for a split second before his thumb hovered over the button and pressed block. He did the same on WhatsApp, then Instagram, then Facebook. A systematic digital amputation performed with the detached air of a surgeon. He zipped the suitcase. The sound was sharp, final. He walked past me, not even brushing my shoulder as if I were a piece of furniture. I stood in the hallway, speechless, as he walked to the front door. Gideon, please, I whispered, the fight finally draining out of me, replaced by a raw, cold panic. Don't do this, we can talk about it. He didn't look back. He just opened the door, stepped through, and closed it quietly behind him. The click of the lock settling into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my world breaking. For the first 48 hours, my primary emotion wasn't sadness or even regret. It was a hot, simmering indignation. How dare he? How dare he turn this into such a melodrama? He'd be back. Of course he'd be back. He just needed to cool off to realize how ridiculous he was being. Once he'd had some time to think, he would call, and I would graciously forgive him for his overreaction. Convinced of this narrative, I turned to the audience the joke was intended for in the first place. My friends, I needed backup. I needed a chorus of voices to tell me I was right and he was crazy. I drafted a long, breathless text to our group chat, detailing Gideon's insane reaction to my harmless little video. I painted myself as the bewildered, wounded party, a wife punished for having a modern sense of humor. I just can't believe how thin-skinned he is, I wrote, adding a string of eye-rolling emojis. He literally packed a bag and left over a joke. Am I the crazy one here? I waited for the wave of supportive outrage to roll in. I pictured Karine sending a voice note, calling him a controlling gaslighter. I expected a flurry of dump him, and you're better off messages. Instead, what I got was silence. A long, awkward, deafening silence. The little red receipts appeared under my message one by one. But no one was typing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a single lukewarm reply popped up from Karine. Oh wow, that's intense, hope you guys can work it out. Work it out. That was it, no anger on my behalf, no validation. Another friend, Chloe, just replied with a single yikes. The group chat, usually a constant stream of memes and gossip, went dead. I tried to reignite it a few hours later, sending a screenshot of a funny tweet with the caption, "Some humor to lighten the mood, lol." It was met with a single polite haha and nothing else. The message was clear, the conversation was over, it was even worse in person. The next day at work, I tried to pull Karine aside by the coffee machine, ready to launch into a more detailed tirade against Gideon. But she was suddenly, urgently busy. So sorry, Lyndon, I'm totally slammed, she said, avoiding my eyes as she filled her mug and practically fled back to her desk. Let's catch up later, she never did. The awkward distancing was subtle but brutal. Friends who would normally stop by my desk to chat would now give me a tight little smile and a quick wave as they hurried past. My lunch invitations were met with vague excuses. I was being gently, politely, but firmly pushed to the periphery. I was a spectacle, but only when I was winning. The cool girl who mocked her boring husband was fun. The desperate woman whose husband had actually left her was just uncomfortable. They had enjoyed the performance, but no one wanted to stick around to help clean up the mess when the stage lights went out. The silence from my friends was a far more damning verdict than any argument from Gideon could ever have been. Tonight, I called my sister, Sarah. She lives 3 states away and knows nothing about Karine or my desperate attempt to be cool. I just needed to hear a friendly voice, to vent to someone who was contractually obligated by blood to take my side. I put on my best performance of breezy indifference. So Gideon and I are done, I said, swirling the last of a cheap Merlot in my glass. Yeah, he just packed up and left. Turns out he has zero sense of humor. Honestly, it's probably for the best. I need someone who can actually keep up with me, you know? Someone more exciting. His whole old-fashioned thing was starting to suffocate me anyway. I was talking loud and fast, trying to convince both of us. Sarah listened patiently, making the right sympathetic noises, and by the time I hung up, I almost believed my own tough talk. The bravado lasted for about 5 minutes. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, thick and suffocating. I wandered aimlessly from room to room, the echo of my own footsteps haunting me. That's when I saw it. Tucked away on the bottom shelf of the bookcase in the spare room he used as an office was a plain cardboard box I'd never noticed before. It was just one of the many things he'd forgotten in his swift, surgical departure. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out and lifted the lid. Inside wasn't old paperwork or forgotten gadgets, it was a thick, spiral-bound notebook. The cover simply said in his neat, blocky handwriting, Project Italia. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down on the floor and opened it. It was a travel plan. A meticulously, almost obsessively detailed plan for the 2-week trip to Italy I'd been dreaming of since we got married. It wasn't just a list of cities. He had printouts of train schedules, museum opening times, and reviews for little out-of-the-way restaurants he'd found on obscure food blogs. He'd mapped out a walking tour of Florence based on my favorite Renaissance artists. He'd booked a cooking class in Tuscany. Tucked into the pages were dozens of sticky notes. On one, attached to a picture of a beautiful hotel overlooking the Amalfi Coast, he'd written, View from the balcony, Lyndon will love this. On another, next to a list of gelato shops in Rome. Must try the pistachio, her favorite. The last page was the one that broke me. It was a list of simple Italian phrases, Dove il bagno, and Una tavola per due per favor, written out phonetically in his clumsy scrawl. He was learning a new language for me. The tough girl facade I had so carefully constructed shattered into a million pieces. The wine glass slipped from my hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. I just sat there on the floor of his empty office, clutching the notebook to my chest as a wave of cold, silent tears streamed down my face. The man I had publicly branded as a boring, soulless accountant from 1950. A man whose quiet devotion I had traded for a few cheap laughs and the approval of people who wouldn't even answer my texts now, had been using his spreadsheets and his meticulous planning not to bore me, but to build my dream. He had been loving me in the only way he knew how, quietly, steadily, and completely. And I, in my desperate, pathetic need to be seen as cool, hadn't seen him at all.